What if something sacred was never meant to restrict life, but to restore it? What if the rules people use to judge others are missing the very heart of God? And what if Jesus wasn't breaking something holy, but revealing what it was always meant to be? It began on a Sabbath day, a day set apart, a day of rest, a day deeply respected in the Jewish tradition. For generations, it carried meaning. It represented trust in God's provision. It represented obedience. It represented rhythm, work, then rest. And on this particular Sabbath, Jesus was walking through grain fields with his disciples. They were hungry. As they moved through the field, they began to pick heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands, eating as they went, a simple act, natural, human. But it didn't go unnoticed. Some Pharisees were watching, and they immediately raised concern. Why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? It wasn't really about hunger. It was about interpretation, about boundaries, about how the Sabbath should be observed. To them, what the disciples were doing looked like work, and work on the Sabbath was not permitted. But Jesus responds not with defense, but with perspective. He reminds them of a story from Scripture. David, when he was hungry, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread that was not lawful for him or his companions to eat, yet it was given to them, because human need mattered. And then Jesus makes a statement that shifts everything. The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. That is not a small claim, it is a redefinition of authority. But the story doesn't stop there. On another Sabbath, Jesus enters a synagogue, and there is a man there with a withered hand. The atmosphere is tense. The religious leaders are watching closely, not to learn, but to find something to accuse him of, because they want to see if he will heal on the Sabbath. And Jesus knows it. He understands the intention in the room, so he does something intentional. He calls the man forward, right into the center, not hidden, not private, but visible to everyone. And then he speaks. I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it? Silence. No answer. Because the question exposes the tension. Then he looks around at them all. And he says to the man, stretch out your hand. The man does, and it is restored. Immediately, fully, right in front of everyone. But instead of joy, there is anger. The religious leaders are furious, because something has been disrupted, not the Sabbath itself, but their interpretation of it. This moment reveals a deeper conflict, two ways of seeing the same day. One view says the Sabbath is about strict limitation, about what cannot be done, about boundaries that must not be crossed. But Jesus shows another perspective. The Sabbath is not meant to prevent good. It is meant to make space for restoration, for life, for healing, for mercy. The disciples were hungry, the man was suffering, and in both cases, Jesus responds with compassion, not restriction. This is where the tension becomes clear, because sometimes rules are easier to follow than understanding purpose. Rules can become rigid, predictable, safe. But life is not always predictable. People get hungry, people get hurt, people need healing. And Jesus is revealing that the heart of God is not in conflict with human need. It is aligned with restoration. The Sabbath was never meant to be a burden. It was meant to be a gift, a rhythm of rest that reflects trust. Trust that life is sustained not only by effort, but by grace. But when rules become more important than people, something shifts. And that is what Jesus is addressing. Not the Sabbath itself, but how it is understood. Because if the Sabbath cannot allow good to be done, then something has been misunderstood. When Jesus asks, is it lawful to do good or to do evil on the Sabbath? He is reframing the entire conversation. Good is never out of place. Compassion is never out of season. Restoration is never wrong, even on a day of rest, especially on a day of rest. The healing of the man's hand is not just a miracle, it is a statement. That wholeness matters. That suffering is not meant to be ignored in the name of tradition. That mercy is not suspended because of timing. And that God's work is not limited by human interpretation of rules. But the reaction of the leaders shows something important. They are not simply disagreeing, they are threatened. Because when interpretation is challenged, control feels unstable. And when control feels unstable, resistance appears. So instead of seeing the healing as good news, they see it as violation. This is where the contrast becomes sharp. Jesus sees a man restored. They see a rule challenged. Jesus sees life being made whole. They see boundaries being crossed. Two perspectives, same moment, but completely different conclusions. And this raises a question for anyone listening today. What do we prioritize when we interpret life? Do we see people first or rules first? Do we recognize need or only structure? Because Jesus consistently reveals a pattern. When human suffering and religious structure collide, he chooses restoration, not destruction of the law, but fulfillment of its purpose. The Sabbath command was never meant to prevent healing. It was meant to reflect rest, and rest includes wholeness. The disciples eating grain were not rebelling, they were responding to hunger. The man with the withered hand was not asking for attention, he was in need of restoration. And both moments become opportunities for Jesus to reveal something deeper. That divine law is not detached from human life. It is meant to serve it, to protect it, to restore it. The religious leaders miss that connection because they are focused on preservation of structure. But Jesus is focused on fulfillment of purpose. And those two things are not always the same. The Sabbath was created as a gift, a pause, a rhythm, a reminder that life is sustained beyond constant labor. But when that gift becomes rigid expectation, it can lose its meaning. Jesus does not abolish the Sabbath, he restores its intention. He brings it back to life by showing that doing good is never out of place in God's design. The healing in the synagogue is quiet but powerful. A man lifts his hand, a life is restored, but internally, something else is exposed. The difference between outward observance and inward understanding. Because it is possible to follow a rule and still miss its purpose. It is possible to maintain tradition and still miss compassion. And this is the tension Jesus brings into the open, not to destroy belief, but to realign it, to bring it back to its center, human dignity, mercy, restoration. The reaction of the crowd after the healing is not recorded in detail, but we can imagine the silence, the shift, the discomfort. Because moments like this do not leave people unchanged. They force reflection. They ask questions that cannot be ignored. What is truly holy? Is it the rule itself or the purpose behind it? Is holiness defined by restriction or by restoration? Jesus answers with action more than explanation. He heals, he restores, he reveals. And in doing so, he shows that the Lord of the Sabbath is not bound by misunderstanding of it. He is its fulfillment. The one who defines its meaning through mercy. The one who reveals its purpose through healing. The one who shows that rest is not the absence of good, but the presence of wholeness. And that changes everything. Because it reframes how we see sacred time, how we see obedience, how we see compassion, and how we respond when they intersect. The disciples walking through grain fields were not careless, they were human. The man with the withered hand was not a problem. He was a person. And Jesus responds to both with restoration. That is the heart of this moment. Not breaking what is holy, but revealing what holiness has always been meant to look like. Life restored, people seen, mercy active, and goodness not delayed by misunderstanding. That is the message of the Sabbath in this encounter. Not restriction, but restoration. Not limitation, but life. And when that is understood, everything shifts, because then doing good is never out of place. It is always aligned with the heart of God. Thank you for watching this video. If this message spoke to your heart, don't forget to like, follow the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today.